Hi there, and welcome to this short video on a crash course on Segment.com. Now, if you're familiar with Segment or maybe you've seen some of the materials, you might know a little bit of what they are, but there's a lot of questions that come up as soon as every company starts to research Segment and figure out what are the downsides, why should you use it, what should you know about, and so on. And a lot of times, implementing Segment does mean some kind of investment, either in programming hours or something else. So in this video, what I really want to take you through is just give you a sense of what Segment is, give you a quick walkthrough of how the product looks, and then start to answer really the questions around what role Segment plays within an analytics strategy and what role it will play within your company. So get really good at why you should use it and why you should not use it. Now, let's start with the most common questions that I hear around Segment. These are things I hear from clients and companies who come talk to me, and pretty much anyone who has any questions around analytics. It all starts because you want to use tools like Mixpanel or Intercom or Amplitude or Google Analytics. But then you find out there's Segment, which kind of plays with those tools, and then then all the questions become very specific. How does Segment work with Mixpanel, or insert any tool here? Are you sending the data to Segment first and then to Intercom? How does it get converted? Does it, is there any downsides? What if you want to load things like marketing pixels? Does Segment handle that too? Or do I need something like Google Tag Manager on top of that? And I talked to the support team at ToolX, and they said I shouldn't use Segment. And the last one is actually quite common. Most analytics tool support team, they are aware of Segment, and they can usually offer the pros and cons of using Segment. Now, what Segment really is, it functions as a hub, right? And what I want you to understand from this video is that this hub can be Segment, it can be one of its competitors, mParticle or Keen.io, or you can even build this in-house if you really wanted to. But what you really want is you want the central layer that lives on top of your data and also in between where all your data is flowing through. So Segment has this great little diagram here that explains it quite well. But what we see here is that at the very top, we have the sources where data is coming from. Your mobile apps, your web apps, server events, and then you have all this kind of cloud apps. And the cloud apps is an ever-growing list. In here, you can have things like MailChimp and Salesforce and Stripe and an endless number of tools. And each of those tools has a little bit of data, right? And your customers will interact with a bunch of tools throughout their experience, right? They might first come through Salesforce and then be converted, so now they're in the website, and then they'll use the app, and then maybe they'll take payment through Stripe, and then they'll maybe ask you a question through something like Zendesk, right? So just right there, you have 5 or 6 different tools that your customer interacted with, and there's a little bit of data. So the question is, how do you send all this data from all these different tools, all the different aspects to the right places, and how do you store it, right? So the most common scenario is you have a web app or you have a mobile app, and you want to use something like Mixpanel or Amplitude. So clearly you have to send events, event code tracking through your apps, and you send them to the analytics tool. The first challenge that comes up there is you're going to have different tools that will need roughly the same events. Right. So for example, the events you might send to something like Mixpanel and Intercom are very similar, almost identical. So instead of writing it twice, instead of writing it events in the Mixpanel API and then writing events in the Intercom API, you could use something like Segment, and again, or something similar to Segment, that simply abstracts that and simply takes an event from your app and sends it to the right tools. So in this case, we can see, for example, the second box from the top. We have the web. So we imagine we have an app coming from a web app, and then it's going to be flowing down to the second option in the bottom, an analytics tool. And here it's one box, but you might have 4 different tools that need the exact same event, right? So again, don't write it multiple times. You really should only be writing it once. Then you have things like, for example, you might have events from your server and from other apps, and they all need to flow into Mixpanel as an example, right? So again, should you be writing all those specifically, or should you just simply write it once and send it? So the way Segment handles this is they convert it for you. So you write it in their APIs, whether it's a JavaScript API or the Node.js or Python, whatever it is, and you say, okay, I'm sending this event. These are all the properties, And then once it goes to the center, which is the hub, which is Segment in this case, they'll then convert it into Mixpanel specific code or intercom specific code or amplitude specific code, and it abstracts that logic from you. One benefit you'll quickly understand is if one day you want to move away from Mixpanel, and it's almost guaranteed that whatever tool you choose, you're going to move away from it to something else that's much suited for the stage of growth in your company. If one day you want to move away from a tool, are you going to have to rewrite all that event code tracking for whatever new tool you have? Or can you simply turn off a switch and turn on a new switch and send data to a new tool without having to rewrite it? That's the promise that something like Segment brings to the table. I promise they actually do fulfill quite nicely, and the competitors do fulfill quite nicely. This very high level abstraction where you get the data that you want in the tools that you need, but you're not really writing it in their specific APIs. Now, the other challenge that comes up is from this cloud apps, and is the data is living inside these apps, right? So, for example, inside MailChimp, inside Stripe or Salesforce, and you want to be able to pull it out and send it somewhere. A very common scenario is, for example, you want to answer simple questions, right? So let's imagine a very simple question. What is our CAC? And this is a question that's very common among startups. What is our cost of acquisition? But what comes up from this question is that to answer just this one seemingly normal common question, you need to pull data from multiple sources. Let's imagine you're running ads on two platforms, Facebook and Google AdWords. And this is really the two most popular platforms for running ads. And then you got Mixpanel set up for tracking some engagement, and you got Stripe, processing payments. Again, very common stack. You need all of these four sources to answer this one question: what is our CAC? So the question becomes, how do you pull data from these different tools, these different silos of data, combine it, and answer this question, and ideally in some kind of automated fashion, right? You shouldn't have to, be pulling CSVs and Excel files and combining them, though it's actually very common and it's fine in the early stages. But eventually, you want to be able to have some kind of automated report, some kind of dashboard that can automatically refresh all this data and just give you the answer, right? And you can say, okay, last 30 days, our CAC was X. And as you have more sources, as you have more advertising platforms, or you're spending money in different areas, or whatever it is, your dashboard is able to adapt to that and is able to build from that. And this is again where when we come back to our hub idea, we can have something like Segment, and Segment in this case can do it for you. It's the idea of you pull data from, right? So all this data is accessible through APIs, right? You could write your own scripts and pull data from Salesforce or pull data from Facebook ads and pull the information out, and then you can send it somewhere like a database, right? In this case, Segment does help you with that. Again, they call it warehouses here at the bottom right, but this is an Amazon Redshift database or Postgres database. And what this can do is, on an automatic fashion, every 4 hours, every 8 hours, it can pull data from specific sources like Facebook ads, like Google AdWords, and then send it to a database. Not only that, the events you're sending from your web and mobile apps, you can also send them to this database alongside your analytics tools. So you have an event, right? Let's imagine it's a sign-up event, and you're going to send the event to Mixpanel, you're going to send it to Intercom, and you're going to send it to a database. And this is where things get really interesting, because now you have a database that you control, that you have access to, that you're the owner of, that contains a full copy of all your data from the moment you started tracking it all through this very abstraction layer. Which means if you now want to ask a question like, what is our CAC? The best source for that data is your database. It's all there, right? So you can just pull from there, pull from the different tables and different rows, and answer that question. But the tricky part is getting this foundation done correctly. Otherwise, you're stuck with maybe having a bunch of scripts, or maybe you have a bunch of things that are pulling data from different apps and trying to all bring it together into one database. So ideally, you have a foundation, right? And that's where something like Segment comes in. They give you that foundation from the very start. And this is really what appeals to a lot of companies when they see it. To almost every engineering team out there, to tell them that they're going to abstract a lot of this analytics implementation. And even though the marketing team is going to ask them for a bunch of events and maybe even switch tools and add those pixels, and they're going to ask them to pull data from all those other tools out there, no problem, because it's going to be done right from the start, and they're going to be able to adapt to it. So let's cover two concepts in Segment. The concept of integrations and sources. So really, this is where you start to see the two areas of Segment. So integrations is anything you can push data to. So if we narrow down by analytics, we'll see nearly all the popular tools out there, right? We have things like Google Analytics, we have things like Kissmetrics and Mixpanel, and at the top we'll have Amplitude, which is becoming quite popular, and so on, Whooper at the bottom. So again, this is all the apps that you can send data to, or you can load in some kind of way. For example, AdRoll is a tool that you're not really going to send events to, but you're going to load the pixel. So this is, if you go back to the idea of the hub, you had the sources where data was getting pulled from, and then the aspects where you were pushing data to. So integrations are all those, right? And we have, there's no total number here, but it's 100 plus possible integrations and tools. And you can imagine almost anything that you want to use will be here. So things like Outbound for email notifications and SMS and intercom and some of the customer success or customer support tools, they're all here. So they can all be loaded through one single script. Imagine if you're doing it from a JavaScript perspective or a product. So this becomes your central repository that lives on top of all of these tools. Now the second concept is sources. And this is where we're pulling data from. Now we have the classic things like, for example, Android app, which means we're going to send apps from inside an Android app or iOS app. This is the same that, for example, Mixpanel, through their APIs or through the libraries, you can send an event through the Android Mixpanel library to Mixpanel. This is the same thing. And we can see a lot of things here are the basic things that all the other tools have. JavaScript, we have Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby, and so on to capture events and be able to send them. And then we have some tools like this, right? So here's Google AdWords and Facebook Ads, two popular tools that we want to pull data from. So in this case, say if you go into Facebook Ads, we can see that we can pull things like the campaigns, we can pull the ads, the clicks, we can pull things like what was the return, what was the results from these campaigns. And then through that data, then we can come up with things like what was the return on investment on this campaign. And we can combine that with, say, event data, which was sent to Mixpanel, but we also captured. We can combine that and start to answer those questions like CAC. Again, doing this yourself, being able to pull data from Facebook Ads is possible. You can write scripts, you can interact with the same APIs. Nothing here is private, but it's really a tedious effort for things that you may only have to write once. So this is a relatively new aspect for Segment, and it's going to be built in, I think, as we go along. As we still see some major ones missing here. At this time we don't see Mailchimp, for example. We don't see a few key ones, but I think this will be something that will be growing going forward. Now, so let's log into Segment, and this is an account that I have. So once you create a project, then you start with a source, of course, right? So remember, right? We have the hub, and the very first thing we have is how are we going to send data to Segment? What's going to be the source of this data? So when you have a source, you get the same things that we looked at before, right? We have JavaScript, which means a JavaScript library, the analytics.js library. We have the mobile libraries. We have a bunch of popular cloud apps. We can actually see Mailchimp here as an alpha. As you can see, we started to come out. And we have different server libraries, even just something that's called an HTTP API. Right. So once you choose a source, for example, this we have a source here. We can go in, and here we can see, okay, we're sending data, right? So data is being sent successfully, and where's this data being sent to? So in this case, we have integrations on the left-hand side, and we have warehouses. So integrations was what we just showed. So let's go here, and we have the same list as before, right? The same categories, analytics, heat maps, customer success, and we have the same list as before. So now let's imagine we want to use Mixpanel, right? So we click Mixpanel, and it tells us, this integration can receive data from a browser, from a mobile library, from a server library, and some couple of extra steps to be able to integrate this. Then in settings, we add a token, we add an API key, which you will get from your Mixpanel project. We have a couple extra settings, for example, to be able to use the Mixpanel people function. And there's some advanced settings here that are specific to Mixpanel, things like people properties, super properties, increments. These are things that if you've seen the Mixpanel documentation, you'll understand them, right? And once we have our API key or our token or whatever is needed to connect this integration, we simply enable it. And in this case, is enable, right? So when we go back here, we're now sending data to Mixpanel. Now, in this case, this is a JavaScript source, which means we're sending data through the JavaScript library in Segment. So we can see, for example, the debugger shows us the real-time data. So this one, for example, right? So we're sending this event here, which is called analytics.page. And this is a basic page view function. But in here, you can have things like analytics.track, which is an event, the analytics.identify, which is how you identify specific users within Segment and within analytics app, like Mixpanel and Amplitude, and a few other ones on top of that. But this is the classic event code tracking structure that you'll see in nearly all the analytics tools, especially in JavaScript. So we have the event, the box, and then we have the properties inside: path, refer, search, and so on. A lot of things are captured automatically. So we have this event, which is in the segment structure, right? The analytics.page is the segment function. We can look at, for example, the raw data to see everything else that was collected. This is where we can see things like the browser, the title, URLs, any errors that came up with this. Now, Segment will take this event, and in the backend, without you doing anything, it will then convert it to the Mixpanel equivalent, whatever it is, right? So in this case, that event it just gets converted to the Mixpanel.track function. And you don't have to do anything. You just have to write it for Segment, their purposes, and then it will simply convert it. And in here in the integrations, we could add, we could add Intercom, we could add Amplitude, we could add Customer I/O, we could add, Facebook takes in-app events. We could add any tool out there that requires events, and we just have to write it once. And that analytics.page function you saw will then can convert it to all the specific tools you list here, all in the backend, right? You don't have to reply anything. It's in near real time. So you send an event, and you'll see it in Mixpanel within a few seconds. And that's really where the magic comes in, right? So when we say, okay, you know what, I don't want to use Mixpanel anymore. I want to move to Amplitude, right? We'll just kind of switch here. We'll see the Amplitude integration. We need an API key. Once again, we have a couple specific settings to Amplitude here that we may want to change. And then once we add the API key, we enable it, and that's it. And from that moment on, Segment can start sending data to Amplitude. And any event code that we have written, whether it's JavaScript or Node or Python or anything else, will get translated to Amplitude. And that's the magic, right? And that's how you can start switching, or that's how you can switch from a tool like Mixpanel to Amplitude within seconds, really, right? It's just simply a matter of enabling and disabling the right integrations. Now, one of the questions that comes up right away is, okay, what about the historical data, right? We talked a lot about this aspect of how you capture historical data and how do you store it. So when we look at the source, we saw the left-hand column. This is the integrations. We just covered that, right? It's all these potential tools. You just simply add the API keys, and then you start them. And as long as you send in data to Segment, you'll see it there. The other aspect that we have here is warehousers. And this is what are called databases. So here for example, we can see we have a Heroku database here. So if we click into that, this is a Postgres database inside Heroku, but it doesn't really matter where you have it, of course. And what we see here is we have a schema. So Segment automatically sets up the schema for us. And we see events, different tables of different rows. And then, of course, we see the different syncs, right? So we see, automatically Segment will sync any events that get listed for us, right? So when we look at, we have different settings. We just simply add the settings for this right database, what you would expect to be able to connect to a database. That's it. And the same thing happens there. Now, in this case, since it's something that's, it's a database, Segment will create a schema for you. And we actually have the schema tab here that shows us a little bit of what's there. So we can see all the tracks. So for example, the analytics.track, we see, for example, we have 2 events here. And if we click into it, we might see any properties that are applied to this event. In this case, none of these events have properties. Then we have a page, which is what we saw before. A screen, which is specific to mobile apps. The identify calls, and group calls, which are used for tools like Intercom, which have companies and the idea of groups. And this is there. So Segment will manage the schema for you in the database, and it'll keep you up to date. Now, something that becomes very cool by being able to have historical data in some of the higher level plans of Segment is they can do what they call data replays. So you have all this data. You let's say you set up Amplitude here, and you have 6 months of data in your warehouse, right? Because you've been tracking this since day one, and you have 6 months of data in Mixpanel. It's been there since day one, but now you added Amplitude, and Amplitude hasn't been here since day one. You just added it, which means it doesn't have the last 6 months of data. But Segment actually has an option that lets you replay the data and send it from your warehouse, from Segment into Amplitude. And they'll actually take your historical data with the timestamps and send it to Amplitude. And Amplitude will recognize it and will organize it historically, which means in a matter of a few minutes, not only are you able to switch to a brand new analytics tool and start tracking data without having to rewrite your event code, you're able to get access to your past 6 months of data and upload it there again without having to worry about importing it. I had a few clients where we have done this manually because the data wasn't in Segment. So we wrote scripts to take their database data, convert it into the proper Segment structure, and then send it over to a specific integration. And that's something you do as well. In this case, whatever you have from day one in Segment, then you can replay it and send it back. And that's really it, right? And this is really the power of Segment. Especially as you add different sources and you have different places where this data is coming from. And for a lot of companies, the complexity gets increases so quickly, right? You have mobile apps, you have web apps, you have all these tools. Even smaller startups who are just getting started might have a couple mobile apps, a web app, and they'll be spending money in Facebook and Google AdWords. Just automatically, 4 or 5 different sources of data. So how do you bring them all together into one single place and manage it all? And I can tell you from working with past companies that something like Segment, and again, you can definitely find alternatives like Empirical and Kinayo, and maybe even build your own. But something like this that abstracts it for you is incredibly powerful, to the point where we've been in projects where we want to start something new, and we don't have to worry about, do we have access to historical data? Are we going to be able to set this up quickly? Because it's all a matter of a few clicks to get something going, to start getting data, and a few extra clicks to then to get the data replay, to get historical aspect. And right away, you can hit the ground running in a brand new tool with all your data. And your data becomes portable, which is incredibly powerful. This portability and this ownership of your data, which is really yours. You should really be able to take it wherever you want, whenever you want. And this is what something like Segment does. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to hear them. You can always email me personally, and I'm always interested in anything you might want to say. But that's it for now. Thank you. Have a good day.